So today we're going to talk about the early days that I was at Valley Heart. That was what we named it. Of course, we had all kinds of different names. One of my best friends, Bill Angel, was had a big cardiac heart surgery program in the Valley Heart over at San Jose, and he was thinking of what names to live, what names to use, and he decided that his first name was going to be World Cardiac Heart Area. He wanted to go big time. I mean, he was aggressive, ready to go. He had a whole team going, working, helping out. And they thought that even the World Heart Group thought that was a little bit too much. So I think they called themselves Valley Heart for the valley in San Jose that they were located in. Anyway, and so when we got to Modesto, I was calling myself, the lawyer set it up, Louis Stephen Endsley, MD, a cardiac group. And then I had a couple of cardiologists and a heart surgeon said, hey, look, we don't want to work for you the rest of our lives. Let's just call it something else. So we searched around and we called it Valley Heart we were in the Valley Heart of the big growing areas. The growing areas in this, the growing crops in this area are wine grapes, and we had the biggest winery here, Gallo, maybe in the world. And the second thing is we had Stanislaus Food Products, we had Southwest Container, and we had a container company. We had Sun Opta, which is making different types of juices. For example, they had soy milk, regular milk, some kind of hay milk that come from wheat, and all these were fairly big operations in the Modesto area, as well as a big group called Del Monte, which did fruit especially, and some vegetables. And so Valley Heart sounded reasonable to us. And so the other thing is we have, the question is, how do we attract patients? And so when I told you first that we had when I first met here, they said, cardiologists, what do the cardiologists do? And I realized that they hadn't had much penetration of cardiac work in this area. So I set up, with the help of the hospital, and a series of lectures that come every Friday morning at 7:30 a.m. to about 8:30 or 9, and I would give every lecture every week. And so that was for both nurses and doctors. We had a pretty good turnout, about 25 or so. Then I realized that we needed to get something else to attract them. They didn't want to come and sit early in the morning in a chair and only. And so I got the hospital to agree to give them all breakfast. So they started a breakfast, and that increased the number of people coming to about 40, because the food and training is always attractive. Then the next thing was, every doctor every 2 years has to take a test, and the test is on the subject that he or she is familiar with, but they have to have 50 hours of credit. In other words, over a 2-year period, they have to build up about 50 hours of credit, so they have to have it all tracked and signed. And so this is sometimes hard to get a number of training spots so you can have ready to do your 2-year testing. And so anyway, so that was that. And so what happened was, that went up from about 25 or 30 up to about 45. In other words, each time you make it more advantageous for a doctor or a nurse to join the ability to have both education, food, and points on the license so that they could meet the criteria of training of all different types of courses. But of course I was concentrating on cardiology. So anyway, so we were doing that, very good. And after about a year of doing this, I realized that we were getting repeat business, but not a lot of new people. So what I decided, I opened it up to training people in whatever they wanted to learn from the different specialists, whether hematologists would talk about that, and pulmonary would talk about that. And so we had an ongoing group of education, which everybody seemed to really like, and it was helpful, and it made their life easier in getting their credits. And after about a year, I stopped doing that because, quite frankly, after about 50 lectures, I ran out of stuff to say. But so I repeated some of them because some of them were more popular than others. And that's how we sort of got our word out that we were there with cardiology training, experience, and open for referrals. So we started getting quite a number of referrals. And in the early days, one of the first referrals was a guy by the name of Jose. He had come in with a heart attack a few days before in Los Banos. And he wasn't doing so good. His blood pressure kept falling. He was having trouble breathing. So he called me up and said, I think this guy's just going to die, but if you wouldn't mind just giving him a try at the end. I said, sure, soon him up right now. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I said, I'll meet him in the CCU at Doctor's Hospital. They said, great. And so they sent us off. And by then he had developed a complete heart block. And so he was looking a little shaky. And so he came up to a Doctor's Hospital, and I put a temporary pacer in him, of course. Started him on dopamine drip to get his blood pressure up. And we tied him through the night. I was up all night the first night, but after that he was getting more stable. So the group took over the next couple of weeks. After 3 or 4 weeks, Jose was stable, heart attack was calming down. And so I called up Dr. Lanfranchi and I said, Dr. Lanfranchi, remember that Jose that you signed up with the heart and inferior wall myocardial infarction? Yes. And I said, well, I told him how all the treatment we gave him and watched him carefully, put him on some cardiac medicines. And I said, now he's ready to go home. And we want to make sure you have an appointment to see him. He said, you're kidding, he lived through all that? We thought he was going to die. In fact, when I sent him away, I said, too bad. He was too sick to get better. And so I explained to him all the things we did, and he was amazed. And there was 4 or 5 doctors in Los Banos. So we went around and told Dr. Lanfranchi told all the other people in Los Banos that we got a heart center if you want to, move your cases out so you don't, to get better treatment. And so they all sent them, ever since then, they sent them all up to me at Doctor's Hospital. But also, there was a problem with that because I was getting referrals from everywhere because I was the talking head of the group. And so what happened was, I said, after I'd been there about 1.5 years, working every day, just every day, and they kept sending patients, and I said, well, geez, I can't continue this. I've been up all night and only take Sunday afternoon off, and that's only to do charts. And so I said, I need a partner. So Dr. Michael Smith, an internist in the area, who had just come out of Irvine, I talked to him, and he said, a good friend of mine is at Irvine, and his wife wants to get him to work. Well, I said, what do you mean to get him to work? He said, well, he took a pulmonary fellowship, 2 or 3 years. Then he took a cardiology fellowship, 2 or 3 years. And then he took, he was planning to go into gastroenterology for a 3rd specialty in his life. And his wife said, no way, you got out there and work. And so, although Richard was just a wonderful academic, learning everything and every specialty. And he joined us. And he was a very hard-working guy. He worked day and night, took all the responsibility for everything. I never forget, we wanted to do a hard cast on different days. So he took Monday. He put all of his casts on Monday. So we had about 10 hard casts going Monday. That's for Richard Smith alone. And then it gradually filled up the rest of the week. And so we were very pleased with that. However, it did lead to some complications in a way, because everybody wanted to do hard casts. Everybody wants to do this or that. So we hired a fellow by the name of Bill Taylor. And I was visiting one of my best friends from high school, Larry Sharp. And Larry and I used to go around to Vassar Brothers Hospital in Poughkeepsie, New York, and listen to lectures they gave. And one night, we went together to a double lecture series. One was on formaldehyde and how it affects the heart and how it can cause blindness. And they had all the studies on that. And then the other one was how the gravitation of the moon is sending some orbits away from us and some towards us. And how do you know that? Well, if they're coming toward you, you know they're red. If they're moving away from you, they're blue. Now, I don't remember exactly whether it's that or reversed, but anyway, so Larry got very interested in that, and of course he went to Cornell in engineering physics, the hardest course up there at the time, in Cornell, and so he ultimately joined the Navy as a pilot. And he went through all the different stages. Like, for example, he went through helicopters, fixed-wing airplane, training in jets, and finally he became a fighter pilot. And there were 13 people in his group, fighter pilot group. And at the end of the war, of the 13 fellow jet pilots in his group, he was the last one alive. All the other 12 had died from various things. Some, of course, in combat. Some, of course, when they used to land the jet planes on carrier airplanes. And the guys got used to that. And then they said, well, now let's turn off the lights on the plane. And so if they couldn't find the plane, and they would make a dive toward it, but overshoot it, they would go into the water and die. The jet plane would go right underwater, and you couldn't retrieve them. And so that's what happened. And Larry had a strange experience. One of his new best friends in the Air Force pilots group was a good friend of his. And his friend they were the last two alive, by the way. And so Larry's friend decided to get married. So he asked Larry to be both the best man at the wedding, but also in case anything happened in the plane, and jet plane, and he died, he wanted Larry to be the executor of his will, which figures out how much money and assets you have and then spreads them around to whoever you designate in your will. Okay, fine. And so the wedding was called and was going to be the next night. And so Larry and his friend went to a bachelor party. At the bachelor party, the young men who feel they're invulnerable partied a little bit too much. They got tired. And so the next day, Larry's job was to pick up the wife-to-be, the bride. And so he was there with the bride and waiting. And all of a sudden, the word came in that his best friend, who had taken a motel a little bit out of town, was driving back early in the morning, and for some reason went off the road and crashed down the cliff, landed on the rocks, and died. So now here's Larry, waiting to be the best man, and the wedding, of course, was canceled because he's dead. The other guy's dead. And so Larry went from being the best man to being the executor of the will. And so he had to stay a few extra weeks just to go through all the paperwork related to his will and execution of the will, which is something that the executor of the will has to do. And so it was a shock to everybody. And now here's Larry, my best friend, the only one alive in the 13 original pilots. When Larry came back through Los Angeles, I said, what are you gonna do? He said, well, I said, he was now studying the magnetic rotational information of the moon, which at the time was sort of not real exciting, and but now it was just between all these pilots taking off and going around the moon and learning that, and but anyway, so he quit that job and he went into the naval outer space program as a consultant in aerospace and getting to the moon and going around the moon and so forth. And then he did very well at that, although he was too old at that time to be a pilot of the moon. They always wanted new, fresh faces who were fully trained and very ambitious and so on. And so he had quite a life and quite experiences, a lot of things. So that was interesting to have my best friend have all those experiences, but tough on him and his family, the guy's family, because that was before they got married. So sad. I don't know how it followed. But anyway, so in the meantime, I was going through. I had 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of internal medicine, got my internal medicine boards, and then 3 years of cardiology. So whatever that adds up to is a lot of training. So I was looking around for a job. My wife at the time, we came back from. The lowest rank teacher, professor at Virginia College and Medical Center, and it was my job for 4 jobs. I had number one, I had to make rounds on the patients every day and see the new patients and make sure that they're being correctly diagnosed and treated. The second one was I was learning all about echocardiograms with all the new equipment. Number 3, I was putting in a new cardiac cath lab with direction from the electricians and the other people. And then the 4th one was, now they wanted me to do research on top of all this. And no one person could do all that. And also, I was to train all the residents at different levels in cardiology, so I was doing all that. And on one day, I was asked to give a lecture on the unknown case study, and so it was an unknown, so I was given certain clues, and I had to figure out. The final one was it a ventricular septal defect causing the murmur, or was it a mitral regurgitation solving the murmur? And so I figured that out. I happened to guess correctly. Everything like that, sort of partly a guess. And I got that correct at the big lecture at the VA hospital, and all the people from the VA hospital came to that lecture. Then the next day I had a lecture on my research, and I was doing research in electronics of the heart and the electronics of the way the electronics go through the heart, and what about myocardial infarction, how does that affect it, and what about atrial fibrillation, and recurrent ventricular rhythms. And the next day, I gave all that, and that was two major lectures in 2 days, and I was at that time deciding what I wanted to do, and so I decided. My wife at the time said she wanted to go back to California, and maybe I could go into practice while she finishes her dermatology fellowship. I said, fine. So we went back to California, and I went around looking for a job. Now, looking for a job when you haven't been there for several years is a little hard. So what happened was, I went back to my colleagues at the at three places. At the Pacific Medical Center, where I had been there for about 6 months, learning heart catheterization. And the next one was I talked to the people at Mount Zion who had a heart program. They didn't need any more cardiologists. And so then I went to UC San Francisco. They were just barely starting a cardiology program. So they said, well, look, if you go over the bridge, the Bay Bridge, over to Oakland, I think they need a cardiologist. And so fine. So I went over the bridge and went to the three hospitals up there, Merritt Hospital and two others. No, they didn't need a cardiologist either, but just go down the road to Berkeley. They think they might need a cardiologist. Okay, went down there, no, they didn't need a cardiologist either. So they said, well, if you go over the bridge into Stockton, there's some cardiology groups starting there. So I went over there and they said, no, they've already got 2 cardiologists, they didn't need any more. Fine. And so in the meantime, I reconnected with a friend of mine, Altenhofen, that's his name, and is his name. And so they said, Altenhofen says that they're looking for a cardiologist here under the direction of 3 or 4 of the doctors who want more serious, in-depth cardiac working done so they can keep their patients in Modesto and not have to send them to some other city like San Francisco or something. So I went to an interview there, and the interview came, and there were 7 doctors in the room, and they were all been working very hard for many years. And I used to say that's what men were men and doctors were doctors, and especially up in Sonora where there were about 7 or 8 doctors, but no backup support for pulmonary or GI or anything, and cardiology especially. So I went up there to Sonora and gave a lecture on the new aspects of cardiology, and so they really liked me. I got to know them. I shook everybody's hand and called me anytime, and they did. So that's how we sort of built our practice, by going around to different centers. In Patterson, Merced, Stockton, and we gradually got going in a bigger volume. And then it came up that we should maybe have heart surgery here. And there was a lot of controversy, especially our competition didn't want to have heart surgery because that would be a major advance for them, but not for us. Well, for us, but not for them. And so I interviewed cardiologists up and down in the area, and a guy I really liked was a guy from Stockton, who was turned out to be a mountain climber when he's off duty. And so I offered him a job. I said, you want to come here and be a heart surgeon? I will support you and we will set up a heart surgery center for you. But he went back to Stockton, and the guys up there said, Modesto, it's just a little dusty outlook. We're Stockton, we have all the action here. So he decided not to come. Years later, after we had doubled or tripled his output in Stockton. We talked several times, once a year for about 2 or 3 years. I should have taken your offer, I should have taken your offer. Because up in Stockton, they got several additional heart surgeons which are not connected, not as a group. And so he was having trouble competing. But he said, I should have taken your offer because you're a single cardiologist, how do we know what you were gonna do? He said, all I said was I'm gonna work until I get a heart team going. Anyway, so that all came around. But he was very nice, very polite to me. And he was a great mountain climber. And then as we grew, there was a guy by the name of Andreas Grunzig. He was a East European guy, trained in cardiology in the East European schools. Of course, that was our enemy at the time. East and West were at odds in Germany, and so he jumped over the fence and came and went to a research group in West Germany, and he learned how to do another techniques for arteries. Now, in that day, we were putting in bypasses because Rene Favallaro in a major heart center in the middle of America had learned how to do bypass surgery where you take a vein out of the calf, and there's 3 arteries that go to the heart, and if they're blocked or narrowed, and they think they may be blocked, and they have a heart attack and die. He was sewing one end of the aorta, bringing the other end down around the blockage, sewing the other end of the coronary artery, and this was called bypass surgery. A lot of people didn't think it was ever going to last, but not only did it last, it thrived, and it's still a very good option for people who have bad coronary artery disease, blockages, or narrowings, especially if they're older. In other words, older patients have a higher chance of dying in heart surgery. So what we did was we figured out what the words were what would cause death, and we put together a schedule of what we needed to do to prevent the deaths and get the people through the heart surgery at angioplasty and stents. So that was fun. And in the meantime, I was going to meetings about every 2 to 3 months in Zurich, Switzerland, trying to keep up with. It was a group of 20 of us, 20 cardiologists, chosen by the European group to be high enough level to make a meaningful contribution to their adventure, and not only their adventure, but their excellent background of legal and economic and bypass surgery, getting people to not die as much as they used to. And I think that's enough for right now. What do you think?